Welcome inside this midweek edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Old National Bank. I'm Rick Pizzo. Coming up, we hear from Ohio State offensive coordinator Chip Kelly on why the quarterback competition is still wide open in Columbus. Plus, my exclusive interview with Oregon head man Dan Lanning as the Ducks get set for year one inside the Big Ten. But we begin, as we often do, with today's big story and a look at the preseason rankings heading into a season with so many unknowns and new additions. 6 Big Ten teams, a full third of the conference, are ranked inside the top 25 in the preseason coaches poll, and 4 sit inside the top 10. Ohio State leads the way at preseason number 2, with Oregon just 1 spot back. Michigan starts the season ranked 8th, Penn State 9th. Our training camp crew just had a chance to see the Nittany Lions in person. So let's take you to State College, where Dave Revson anchors our coverage.
Rick, thanks. Here with Jerry DiNardo, Howard Griffith, and Yogi Roth. We just watched Penn State go through its preseason practice. A long practice, an impressive one for sure. I think everyone knows what the question marks are with this Penn State team. Can they get to that 12-team playoff? They would have made it 6 of the last 8 years. The thing that maybe holds them back, I think, in some people's mind, is this offense. New offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki. Tell people what to expect.
Well, they have the talent to make the playoff. I don't think there's any doubt. They have to replace 3 offensive linemen. They have the talent to do that. Wide receivers, I think, have to be developed. And if they're talking about getting the ball to the best players, they got 2 guys in the backfield that are as good as anybody in the country.
Yeah, I think when you initially look, you see all the motion, you see all the shifting, you see just how they create space for their playmakers. And that's going to be very difficult for defenses to try to attack or really stay back and try to understand, keep these guys in front of them. But I'm going to tell you, the one thing that stuck out to me was just how he went through his practice, and more so pre-practice, installing the system. There was a lot of teaching, a lot of learning going on, and once they got to practice, it started. They went fast.
He had a great term for that. It's class on grass, and he said rather than spending time in the classroom, let's come out here and walk through it. And I know you thought that was really effective as well.
Yeah, look, I think a coach's job is to learn your learner, right? These are kinesthetic learners. Yeah. These are audio learners. They're visual learners. You saw it all right here on the field behind us, and then you watched it play out in the practice field. That's what I loved. I think football is a linear-based teaching model. So you start with install, right, and then you start with stretching, and then you go to individual, and then one-on-ones, and then team. You saw that today, and the thing that stood out to me was the situational football. Yes. Because you need situational mastery if you want to do what you just referenced to go to the playoff, and it starts with the quarterback. Do you have mastery around all the looks you're getting on defense, all the things now with the headset that's going on from offensive coordinator to you? Drew Aller was impressive, really impressive with this new offense. It's a new language for him. He seemed like he had some mastery around it.
And when you talk about the playoff, you're also talking about schedule. And I think there's good news and bad news there. The good news is there's no more East Division. The tough news is this opener, West Virginia in Morgantown, new coordinators, second year for Drew Aller, but a new offense.
Yeah, but I like where this team is. It seems like there's something to them, right? They've got a chip on their shoulder. I've been talking about it because you talk about all the teams that have a chance to win this playoffs. Penn State's not one of those teams that they talk about. And I think from a standpoint of a player, coaching staff, that's a chip because they talk about the Ohio States. They talk about Oregon, and they talk about everyone else.
It was interesting in talking to James Franklin after practice. He was saying, hey, we have to make the playoff, but we want to win in the playoff too. And I think there is kind of maybe people are holding them to the standard of, well, can they get in? Yeah. And so to your point, Howard, hey, we're not just about getting in, we're about winning. I think if they are going to win, the defense is going to be a huge part of that. Tom Allen, the new defensive coordinator, we know him really well from his time at Indiana. He inherits a group that's loaded with talent that has been highly successful here, Yogi. Manny Diaz did an incredible job, now the head coach at Duke. What'd you think of the D?
Well, 2 things travel, run game and defense. So they're going to go Morgantown with 2 of the best backs in America and one of the best defensive front sevens that I've seen in quite some time. They have Abdul Carter, who's obviously a monster, moving all over the defensive line, coming from the linebacker position, the length at linebacker, the range at safety, the depth at corner. They're going to be able to roll bodies. Defensive line, they got 8 guys, and they all look the part. So I'm a big believer. They've done a nice job on the line of scrimmage, and I think that's only going to make the offensive front even better. So they've got the tools. And look, I know not everybody is picking them to win the Big Ten, but can you imagine a wild card game here? I mean, legit. I mean, it's a ways away, but that is going to be bonkers.
You talk about players development. There's a lot of development with both play callers. I know they've tried to keep some of what they've done in the past, but you go into Morgantown, you have a game plan that it's not necessarily the play when you draw it up on the board, it's when you call the play at what time against what defense. And both these guys have to develop their confidence in their individual personnel before they can become really good play callers. They have to get to learn their players.
Yeah, I think one of the things when you look at them, particularly from a defensive standpoint, is when I look at the corners and the safeties, these guys are willing tacklers. I mean, there was a lot of competition drills that went on, and they were competing. And this was, you guys have talked about just how physical this practice was today. Both units are making each other better, and I think that's why it gives them an opportunity to not only make a playoff, but make a run.
Look, everybody's going to talk about the receivers, of course, the backs. Tight end group, man.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 deep. Tyler Warren, real deal. And you talk about the shifts, the motions, the formations, the personnel groupings. You know this coach is going to make it really hard on defensive coordinators. And how do I identify this group? Not knowing what Andy Koldnicki is really going to do out of that group. Like, they don't have any trends right now. You can't just go back and say they're Kansas. The personnel's so different than that. So that will be fun. It will, I think, probably force West Virginia to be a little bit more vanilla on the defensive side when they play them.
I do think they have to be more explosive at wide receiver because obviously, as you mentioned, they're explosive with the tight ends, they're explosive with Singleton and Allen. Can they get explosive plays from the wide receivers?
Yeah, so I think part of it, and you're alluding to it, is you talk about scheming people up. You run 3 tight ends out there on the field. You run 2 tight ends out on the field. Then all of a sudden you spread those guys out. Now what's the defense? Are you trying to play nickel? Are you staying base? They can really start to play some games with a defense and what they're trying to do. So it'll be interesting.
Especially with the first game.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a book on them.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, veteran teams, we saw it last year with Washington and Michigan in the national championship game. They were so veteran. This feels like a veteran outfit, right? Less than 10 guys via the transfer portal that came in. Most teams are in their 30s or 40s when you look at the new bodies. Maybe a couple freshmen will help, but ultimately it's experience that we saw on the field today. Offensive line, they've got the depth to your point. So I think that's going to help them early on. And yes, they'll have to find out, do they have a dude at wideout? Do they have a dude? We'll see. I can't wait to watch because somebody is going to emerge from that group.
They got a lot of good-looking big bodies, I'll tell you that.
No, they do. And again, this is a team that's going to be in the conversation all year.
Yeah.
They're certainly going to head into those last few weeks, and it's going to be a few plays here and there, and whether or not they can win some of those marquee games. Can they beat maybe a team that on paper they're not supposed to beat? Remember, 0-3 against top 15 teams a year ago. They were 10-0 against everyone else. Do you win one of those games? Do you fight your way into this 12-team playoff? They're going to be a fascinating team to watch all year. We're heading back out on the road to Rutgers today, but now let's send it back to Chicago and Rick.
See the big story debuting in mid-October, the streak. This year's Big Ten preseason volleyball poll released earlier in the week, and there are some serious heavy hitters up front. Defending league champ, national runner-up Nebraska leading the way. Wisconsin and Penn State ranked 2nd and 3rd respectively. Purdue and Minnesota round out the top 5, while newcomer Oregon, fresh off back-to-back Elite 8 showings, lands at number 6. I am joined now by Elena Sklar, Holly McPeak. These two punching the time clock and working overtime on Monday and Tuesday with our coverage of Big Ten volleyball media days. We got to hear from the Huskers, got to hear from John Cook. And Holly, I thought it was fascinating because as much hype is behind this team right now, John Cook said, just remember, there have been years just like this when preseason we've been picked to win it all, haven't even made the Final Four. But conversely, there have been years when no one was talking about us and we got all the way to the national championship game.
It's true. Just because you have the best team on paper doesn't mean you're going to win it all. It's who's the best team as a group, who battles together the best.
And this team has a target on their back right now. They also have a bit of a chip on their shoulder after last season. So John Cook saying that, I feel like just adds some fuel to the fire because everyone is picking them right now as their #1 in the Big Ten, possibly nationally as well. So we'll see how they end up playing.
I also asked him a little bit about chemistry because it's fascinating. You have 5 players on the all Big Ten preseason team. Lindsey Krause, not one of them. Really only because she was injured last year, and then you bring in a transfer in former Big Ten Player of the Year, Taylor Landfair. Sure, it's a problem that most coaches would love to have too much talent, but figuring out who plays where and with just one ball to go around is not an easy job.
sometimes when you have so much talent like that and you're fighting for positions, it can affect the culture of a program. But we got to speak to Kennedy Orr and Lindsay Krause about it, and they both were so well spoken about the headspace of where this team is at right now, that they just want to win, that they want to play together as a team. And I think when you have all of that talent, adding Taylor Landfair to that program, it's just going to make them stronger.
But you also have superstars battling for the same position. So when that happens, how can it affect the culture? It's going to be interesting to watch.
There are superstars most certainly in other places, like in Madison. Reigning Big Ten and AVCA Player of the Year Sarah Franklin returns. Kelly Sheffield has a loaded team once again. And Holly, I thought it was fascinating. The West Coast schools, we'll get more into them in a second, but when asked about the difference, they all talked about size and strength, and almost all of them mentioned specifically the Wisconsin lineup.
Well, Kelly Sheffield said it best. He said, we play bully volleyball, and they do. With their size and physicality, they intimidate and really put a lot of pressure on their opponents. But I'll tell you, Sarah Franklin, the AVCA Player of the Year, came back so fit and motivated this year. She looks the best I've ever seen her.
Absolutely. We were talking about that. Sarah looks so strong. She spent some time in the USA Volleyball gym this past summer, and it was just so impressive to see her in that gym and what she can do. They have so much size and strength on this Wisconsin volleyball team, but they also have such a high volleyball IQ, and I think that's what makes them so difficult to play.
And there's no doubt recent history goes into all these preseason polls and returning rosters as well. Wisconsin, of course, part of the Final Four last year. Nebraska, part of the national championship. But you look at depth and talent league-wide, and I don't think any of us would be surprised if a handful of other teams contended with the Badgers and with the Huskers for the Big Ten championship. If you had to pick one, Elena, where would you go?
I'm going to pick that team that just landed 4th on the Big Ten preseason poll, and that's going to be Purdue. I'm a huge fan of Purdue just because of the style of volleyball that they play. They just are so aggressive. They're all out. They have some high-flying players with Eva Hudson and Chloe Chacoin. I really think they can upset some teams this season.
Do I have to pick a team? I think there's a handful of teams that can battle. A lot of teams battled injuries last year, so now they're going to be at full strength. I think there's so many, I would say 5 or 6 competitive programs that can surprise a bunch of teams.
Now, I would even throw teams that didn't make the NCAA tournament last year, like Indiana, into the mix with what Steve Aird returns in the outstanding recruiting classes that he's had the last couple of years. There are a lot of teams in this mix that people may not be discussing as much as Nebraska and Wisconsin that perhaps we're talking a little bit more about when we get to mid and late October. We would be remiss, of course, not to touch on the 4 new additions. We got to meet USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, get inside with their coaches and with their players. And Holly, I thought it was fascinating. Every single one of their representatives not just talked about how excited they were, but how thankful they were to be part of this conference.
Well, they're incredibly grateful for this opportunity. Big Ten Network, you can tell how much they love this sport. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and the West Coast schools are excited to show off their style. It's different. It's going to be fun to watch.
I think we heard the word gratitude the last couple of days at Big Ten Media Days by many different players on many different teams, especially those 4 new teams. They're just so thankful to be here, be part of this conference, and they're ready to show Big Ten what they have, and I can't wait to see those teams compete.
All right, finally, as we wrap things up, you guys got to do all the interviews. 36 student athletes joined you on the other side of our studio for some great conversations. How impressive are these young women, some sophomores at the age of 19, able to handle themselves in that fashion off the volleyball court and inside a television studio, which is not their most comfort space?
I just think about some of those girls. They're like 19 years old on live television. I don't know if when I was 19 if I could form a coherent sentence if I knew a camera was on me. So I was just wildly impressed with how well-spoken they were and just how excited they were to be here and how grateful for the entire experience.
Well, volleyball players are known to always be smart. They always win the GPA award on campus, and you can tell they're a very well-spoken group, and it was fun to get to know them.
We thank all the schools for joining us, all the student athletes, and, of course, wishing them all the best. For Holly McPeak and Elena Sklar, always good to talk Big Ten volleyball. The season starts just 3.5 short weeks from now. And I'm guessing that the guest for our big interview had a little bit of an interest in watching Alyssa Nair and the U.S. women's team. Head coach Erica Dambach of Penn State, who coached Alyssa her last 3 years in State College. First, Coach, before we get into your team, What was your reaction when she made that save, maybe the save of the year, maybe the save of her amazing career, and to go on and watch the women's team win that game 1-0?
Well, first off, good morning. Thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, yesterday was full of emotions. Obviously, as a fan of the U.S. Women's National Team, having worked with that program, knowing those women, and then on top of it, having 3 Penn Staters on the field with Laura Freigang playing for Germany, Sam Coffey, and Alyssa Nair, obviously. I think that game had us all at the edge of our seat. I think our women are incredibly exciting right now. I think that front 3 is as good as any ever in our country and around the world. And the play of Sam Coffey anchoring that midfield, obviously having her back from taking that last game from the yellow card accumulation, and that save of Alyssa Nair, obviously a game-winning save. That game goes into a tie at that point, and that game gets real challenging. So that is what Alyssa does. She is very special in a lot of ways. She's very consistent. She's very steady, but she's able to come up with huge saves like she did yesterday.
Yeah, we see her jersey over your left shoulder. My understanding is you had Sam's jersey at some point, but maybe somebody came in and thought it was a pretty good keepsake for a little while.
It's interesting around here. People just come on into the head coach's office and take what they want. But yeah, Sam Coffey's jersey was over my other shoulder, and I think some people wanted access to that for yesterday's game. So we'll see if that ends up back in here or not. I'll have to negotiate with the Coffey family to maybe find another one.
Yeah, I wish you the best of luck in that quest. I'm sure you're obviously going to be dialed in for this weekend's championship game against Brazil on Saturday as well. But you also have to balance that off with the fact that you have a game, your season opener, the very first live event of the year here on Big Ten Network in just, 8 days against another top 10 opponent. Are you going to have time to watch over the weekend?
We will make time to watch. That is everything for us and for our team. These are wonderful women and role models for our team, and many of our women aspire to be on the world stage someday. So we'll get together as a team. We'll head over to our administration building. We'll have a watch party, and we're going to celebrate this team and cheer our hearts out.
All right, and then you will focus on Texas Tech. Game coming up next Thursday. Your team is ranked 4th in the first preseason poll of the year. Texas Tech is ranked number 8. So what do you want to get out of such an early season game against such a tough opponent?
Well, I think looking at the women's soccer schedule in particular, we're in a position where the team only comes together on July 29th. So you've got 2 short weeks, 2.5 weeks to get your team prepared. As we all know, you need more time in preseason, get through everything that you need. A typical preseason in the professional game is about 6 weeks. Fortunately, this team came together in early June. The captains decided to come back to State College with our performance coach, Bree Cans, and she worked them. And this team is prepared. So we've had a little bit of time with them. We've just joined the party. But they've been at work since early June, and obviously before that in their home environments. But it's going to be an exciting environment here on Jeffrey Field on next Thursday night.
Before you even get into Big Ten play, you not only have Texas Tech, you also have Virginia, Princeton, Georgetown. All of those teams are either in the top 25 or receiving preseason top 25 votes. Why is your philosophy to schedule so difficult in the non-con?
Great question. And that has been my philosophy since I arrived at Penn State. And part of it is when we attract the best players in the world here, they want to be the best, they want to play against the best, and they want to beat the best. And so philosophically, we want to put them in an environment where they're going to be challenged day in and day out at training, on game night on Jeffrey Field, in our away schedule, and we want to be battle tested by the time we go into that Big Ten conference. Obviously, it's going to be a grind, and it's always been the best conference in the country. But now, with our 4 West Coast teams joining us, I think it's undoubtedly the best women's soccer conference in this country.
You named 4 team captains just about a month ago. 2 are seniors, 2 are grad students. So, with that level of experience and leadership, how much do you want this ultimately to be a player-led soccer team?
Yeah, I think on top of those 4 seniors and those 4 captains, the leadership group in general, this is a very senior-led team right now. A ton of experience. Obviously, we had 6 players go pro last year. We had 5 to the NWSL. We had 1 to the Spanish League. And that's a lot of experience gone. But coming up right behind them and filling their shoes in key moments last year and in the previous seasons, these women that are stepping in right now are ready for this challenge. Obviously, they had an elite run Elite Eight run last year, and had an opportunity to go to the College Cup. They could feel it, they could smell it, and I think they believe that we can return to that College Cup again this year.
Every team has a different calling card, a different personality, if you will. What do you think the personality and maybe the strength of this particular group will be?
This is a really fun group to work with. In fact, I said that to them yesterday in preseason. They are dialed in. They are hard workers. There's not a player in the group that you show up and brings you down. They are a group that energizes each other. So I'm just looking forward to getting into the grind of it all with them. They are a group that wants to work for one another. There's a ton of depth in this group. So I think the strength of this group is going to be the depth and the experience overall.
You did touch on the Big Ten, and we have Nebraska, UCLA, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Iowa alongside your team, all ranked inside the top 25. You play 4 of those 5. I think Wisconsin is off your schedule this year, but 3 of those 4 are in back-to-back-to-back games as part of your schedule. You're home against Michigan State, and then you have consecutive road games at Iowa and Nebraska. That's just a microcosm. So try to explain to us what a grind, how hard it will be to get through this league this year with the additional teams and be able to call yourselves Big Ten champions at the end.
Well, you've said it. This Big Ten season is one that is going to challenge us unlike any other. And the fact that we have such good depth, the fact that we have such good experience, we're going to have to ride on it. We're going to have to believe in these players. I think Emma Hayes showed a great example of it yesterday. You've got to be brave, and you've got to be willing to play these players in big moments. And I look across the board in our group, and we are deep in many positions, and we will have the ability to bring players off the bench when fatigue sets in. Inevitably, when we're on the road and we're traveling and we're heading back out to the West Coast in the middle of October and then over to Columbus. So this season will test us unlike any other, but I do think that we are uniquely challenged to drive through that time, kind of run into the storm during that time, because of our depth and experience.
Erica, I want to finish big picture here. We've seen women's sports have an amazing boom in popularity, driven last couple of years by women's basketball. Women's volleyball as well has really been rising in popularity, especially in terms of television coverage. You go back a generation ago and we saw the boom in women's soccer and youth participation after the first run through that World Cup. Now the U.S. team is in a spot to do the same with a lot of youngsters watching again. Is women's soccer ready to join women's volleyball, women's basketball, and take this next step in becoming such a more popular and more accepted sport for the youth, especially, to join in and play?
Well, FIFA just announced that now soccer is the #1 sport in terms of participation around the world. I think it's always worked in that direction, but now this is the largest sport in the world. And the viewers are ready. The viewers want more women's soccer coverage. They want to see these women. They want to see these Big Ten athletes. Obviously, the Big Ten has been on the forefront of some of that with the work that Caitlin Clark and the notoriety and the visibility of women's sports. So I think the viewers are ready for it. Now the networks are starting to understand that. The owners of the NWSL clubs are understanding it. People want to invest in women's sports. People want to watch women's sports, and it's a really exciting time to be part of this movement.
Couldn't agree more. Erica Dambach of Penn State getting ready for the season opener next Thursday against Texas Tech, and you can see it right here on the Big Ten Network. Coach, wish you and the team the best of luck this season. Really appreciate the time this morning.
Thank you so much.
First-year quarterbacks in a Ryan Day system have proven to be more than just effective. In fact, they've been explosive. These are year-one stats since 2018, a year after Day took over the offense and a year before he was the full-time head man. Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud all posted video game numbers. Kyle McCord was solid, if not spectacular, in 2023. Here's new OC Chip Kelly on what we could see in 2024, no matter who gets the job.
No, it's just, we're just trying to, as I told the players, don't count your reps, make your reps count. And I think they're doing a good job, all of them. We're still kind of going through that. I would say probably towards the end of this week we'll start to kind of hone in on it. But it's part of is when he in. Now the day of the lineup changes every day, like who's in with what group, and just kind of mixing and matching right now. But we're all just trying to make the most of our reps, be valuable because of how we're doing it. And a lot of it's two fields. So we got two different groups going on at the same time. And with two different groups going on at the same time, there's a bunch of reps to be had. You know, our first practice, I think we had 96 team reps in the first practice. So there's enough to go around right now. When we start to consolidate and stop doing the two field works and start to get into one field work, then I think you got to start to kind of cut the reps down for some people.
Chip Kelly playing it close to the vest. For more on all things Ohio State, welcoming Dan Hope of 11 Warriors. Dan, we know that Chip has to say the right things right now. We're a long time away from the opener. We don't know exactly when a starter will be named. We presume it's going to be Will Howard. What do you think of Howard's status as the presumed starter right now, no matter what the coaching staff is saying?
I think he's definitely the front runner. I think, based on what we've seen so far in preseason camp, the amount of first team reps he's gotten, like you said, I don't think Chip wanted to break any news on Tuesday, but they don't give out reps randomly. There's a reason why Will Howard's been taking most of the first team reps, and that's because he is the front runner to be the starting quarterback, and he always has been. You don't bring in a quarterback like Will Howard from the transfer portal has 4 years partially of starting experience and bring him in to be the backup quarterback. And so I do think that in the spring that, Will had some rough patches, and that kind of left the door open for Devin Brown and even Julian Say and the freshman to, get into that mix. But either one of those guys was going to have to clearly outperform Will Howard in order to take the starting job away from him. And I think so far in camp, Will has been the best quarterback.
I know you guys at 11 Warriors were part of a group that got to hear Howard address the media earlier in the week. What are your impressions right now of him as both a player and maybe as a person?
Yeah, I think as a person, as a leader, I think he's got a great attitude for what Ohio State needs him to be as a leader of his team. And I think he understands his role in this offense. When you have Travion Henderson, when you have Quinshon Judkins, when you have Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss, they don't necessarily need him to be the next C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields. They just need him to be an effective manager of this offense. And I think that's really what they're hoping that he can be, as someone who has 27 games of starting experience under his belt. I don't think that he has necessarily that same deep passing ability as a C.J. Stroud had for Ohio State a couple years ago, but I think he's been effective in camp in the short and intermediate passing game, and then he also gives them that running threat, which is something they really haven't had at the quarterback position the last few years, but it's something that both Ryan Day and Chip Kelly have identified that they need more of from the quarterback position this year.
I'm glad you brought up some names of former quarterbacks. We could throw Justin Fields in there as well. It appears, at least on the surface, that Howard is more of a Kyle McCord than he was a Haskins or a Stroud or a Fields. So does that mean that the offensive philosophy this year is much more in line than what we saw in 2023, as opposed to when we saw those quarterbacks putting up monster numbers in previous years?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect, Will Howard's going to go out and throw for 5,000 yards. I think that would be unrealistic expectations. But I think the good thing for this offense is, again, you have Travion Henderson and you have Quinshon Judkins. And so you don't necessarily need to have huge passing numbers for this to be an effective offense, because you should have the best running back tandem in the country. Now, at the same time, you have, Jeremiah Smith, who's maybe the most exciting freshman in the country. Emeka Egbuka, who's one of the best receivers in college football. You have Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss, who there's very high expectations for both of them going into their sophomore year at wide receiver. So even without Marvin Harrison Jr., this still might be the best receiving core in the country. And so I still expect this to be an explosive offense through the air. I don't know, again, that you can expect Will Howard to make all the throws that C.J. Stroud was making a couple years ago. But the thing you see in practice, too, is, sometimes Will might be a little bit off with that deep ball, but Jeremiah or Carnell can still go make a play on that ball because they're so talented. And when they're doing that against, Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun, you'd expect they can do that against pretty much any team in the country.
Yeah, and it would be remarkably unfair for anybody to compare a quarterback in college football to C.J. Stroud. When we're seeing what he's doing at the NFL level, it's just not a fair comparison right now. You've already answered any questions I was going to have about the receiver room, because it is remarkably loaded, and it's crazy what they continue to do at that position, producing NFL talent after NFL talent. But the running back room I want to dive into a little bit more because it's fascinating that Travion was there and Quinshawn decides I can come in and maybe a part of this room as well. I know so much has to be decided, but if you were to guess, is this a scenario where we begin splitting carries and ultimately decide on one guy, or do you think both guys will get heavy usage if they stay healthy?
I think both guys will get heavy usage if they stay healthy. I mean, I think these are two guys, you could put them both in the top 5 running backs in college football. And so I don't think the plan is ever going to be for, one guy to sit on a bench for an entire game and watch the other guy run. I think, especially when you factor in what this team wants to do, which is, of course, get to the national championship game, that means playing at least 16 games. And so I think the idea of being able to split carries for both of those guys throughout the season improves the likelihood that you're going to be able to keep both of them healthy. And that is something they really need because the depth behind them is a little bit questionable. The only other 2 scholarship running backs they have are James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon, who are both freshmen. Now, I've been impressed by what I've seen from both of them in camp. And so I think if Ohio State needs them to play, they can give them some quality carries, but you don't want to have to rely heavily on a freshman. And so I think the hope really is you try to keep both Travion and Quinshawn as fresh as possible during the regular season so that you have them both for that 2-headed monster down the stretch run.
Of course, you have to have guys blocking, and the offensive line has seemingly been a huge part of the conversation over the last 2 or 3 years. It's all been about one missing spot and finding one guy to give them a fluid 5. Where are they right now in terms of being confident in maybe at least 5 or more than 5 guys being able to do the job on the O-line?
Yeah, so I think the big question right now is at that right guard spot. They've got Tegra Shabola, who was a top backup last year, and then Carson Hinsman, who was the starting center last year. They're kind of battling at that right guard spot with Seth McLaughlin coming in from Alabama to take over the center position. And so I think they've got 4 pretty solidified starters now. Josh Simmons is a guy that they feel really confident in, that he can make a big jump in year 2 at left tackle. Donovan Jackson, if he plays up to his ability, can be one of the best guards in college football. Seth McLaughlin had those snapping issues at Alabama, but they seem confident that, that's going to be a thing of the past and he's going to be a really solid center for them. And then Josh Pryor had some issues as a pass protector last year at right tackle, but they're optimistic that he's going to be able to make some big strides there as well. So it's really a matter of filling that right guard spot. They like what they've seen from both Tegra Shabola and Carson Hinsman. Don't think they're at the point yet of being ready to name either one of those guys a starter, so that still remains the question mark spot. But I do think there's more cautious optimism on this offensive line this year than there was at this time a year ago.
Listen, I think everybody understands when we focus and talk more about the offense when it's a Ryan Day and now Chip Kelly-led offense. But defensively, you had multiple starters return, guys that could have been high-round NFL draft picks. So I'm curious, what have you heard from guys like JTT and Jack Sawyer and Denzel Burke in terms of why they decided to come back for another year when they most certainly didn't have to?
Well, I think a big reason was they didn't beat Michigan last year. They haven't beaten Michigan for the last 3 years. And those are guys now going into their senior year at Ohio State where if they don't beat Michigan this year, they're going to leave Ohio State without a pair of gold pants. And so I think that was a big reason, for all those seniors, whether it's the defensive guys like Denzel Burke and Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, or offensive guys like Travion Henderson and Emeka Egbuka. They've all said a big reason why they all decided to come back was because they haven't achieved their goals, which, Ryan Day says what the goals are every year. It's beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, win the national championship. They have not achieved any of those goals yet. So I think all those guys really kind of came together and said, we want to make one last ride at this. If we all come back together, we have a chance to be the best team in the country. And I think, that's really what people are feeling right now inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center.
Dan, I know you've heard the question. I know you've heard Ryan Day answer it, and he answers it the way that you would expect him to answer it. Every year, the expectations are exactly what you just laid out. But to me, and I'd love to hear if you agree, this seems more like the must-win year than any other in his history as a head coach, not just because of the losses to Michigan the last 3 years, but also because of what Michigan lost, and also because it's a new era in the Big Ten. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, you see your rivals go and win the national championship last year after you've lost to them 3 years in a row. I mean, 100% that game at the end of November. That's the one Ryan Day really needs to win. But I think really there is that, quote unquote, natty or bust mindset in Columbus this year, because, this roster, I think, maybe, 2019 was up there, but other than that, this is the best roster Ryan Day has had in Columbus. And I think, this is the roster. If you don't win with this roster, then there's going to be questions, because there's just so much talent on this team on both sides of the ball. We talked about quarterback, we talked about offensive line, but there's not really any glaring weaknesses with this team. And so you just look at the talent they have across the board. They should be right up there, I think, with Georgia as the two best teams in college football this year. And, anything less than, beating Michigan and winning the Big Ten and making a deep college football playoff run is going to be seen as a disappointment this year.
Great stuff and insight from Dan Hope of 11 Warriors. Dan, we truly appreciate it. Look forward to talking with you throughout the course of the season.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.